Alright guys, let's talk about security principles. So about cybersecurity. Um, mm, Cybersecurity basically is the practice of protecting information related assets against whatever threatens them. This to me, this is like security 101, and I think it's the very basic definition of what it is cybersecurity. Another thing to be aware is about what we call the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which are the three key things that you're trying to make sure your conditions of cybersecurity, right? So confidentiality, because you want to make sure that data remains confidential. Integrity, because you want to make sure that your data has reliability, right? So the information that you're reading, you're seeing on your screen, is real, not like modified by some other user that was unauthorized to do that change. And available, because you need to make data available to people, right? Of course, you don't want to make available to everybody. However, people that need to see that data, they need to have availability. So these are the three cornerstones of cybersecurity. The essence of cybersecurity that you're trying to protect are computer hardware and software, data, which is the main thing you're trying to protect, the infrastructure, and the personnel that manage it. So those are the assets of security, cybersecurity. Some of the challenges are risk, which is the likelihood that an attack will happen, threat, which is anything that can compromise an asset, and vulnerability, which is basically a threat vector that can be exploited. Common threats to our workstations are malware, network attacks, unauthorized user. Another thing I would like to add to that list is inside threat as well. Somebody that works in an organization, whether it was a benign action or malicious action, it could be a threat as well. Common enterprise vulnerabilities are insecure attack, which could be old software that can no longer be patched, a system that is unpatched because of poor security practices of the company, weak configurations, which could be maybe there are default accounts on a device and nobody, and this happens a lot with system administrators. They try to build an infrastructure from the get-go in the beginning. Let's say the business is starting and they're trying to get all these devices done, configured, and a network, the infrastructure set up and everything. And then 5 years down the road, they do an audit and they find out that they have all these things. And the reason why it was because A, they have somebody with little experience doing all these things. Two, maybe there wasn't enough people doing it. So, mistakes can happen. Not necessarily that somebody on purpose made a bad configuration on a device. It's just sometimes it's just things happen in a business, right? That's why it's always good to start with security best practices from the ground up and not try to implement them later, because a lot of the times you miss stuff. Physical environment is another vector there of vulnerabilities. You have end user following poor security practices. For example, the passwords, sometimes they use things that they shouldn't be using as passwords, or putting post-its in their desks, that's with the password. That's security part practice, bad practice of security. Weak documentation, that's another one. Social engineering basically is the process of which intruders gain access to your facilities or your network, basically by approaching employees and building a relationship, whether they are trying to impersonate somebody that will be above them, or they try to make a connection with a person, maybe it's a receptionist and they're like, hey, listen, the guy that work in a cable company, and we have a new router for your organization that we need to install it today, and if you don't get it today, you're gonna have to pay this much. So sometimes a person that is poorly trained and doesn't understand what's going on, maybe they'll let the person in a data room, you know, and then the person can do, all kinds of stuff in there. Uh, some of the common attacks related to social engineering are shoulder surfing, which is basically, uh, somebody will just go behind you as you're typing something in the computer and they read what you have on the screen or they see what you're typing. Dumpster diving, which is basically you put the organization trash, out on the curb, and by law, anybody can go and grab your trash once it's on the curb. So basically, that's what dumpster diving is. Somebody will go physically get your trash and try to piece it together some documents. Tailgating will be you going inside a building, somebody follows you, they make a connection with you. Hey, yeah, I forgot my badge or whatever, and you let them in, right? Impersonation, that's basically when somebody's pretending to be somebody else. Maybe they try to pretend that they are somebody higher up in the company that you don't have a lot of communication with, so you think that it is that person, maybe it's and you wasn't. Hoaxes, that's basically when somebody when a common way of seeing a hoax is like you get an email about malware or a vulnerability that came out and you need to patch your system and go on this link to do it, right? That's an example of a hoax. Uh, Whaling, that's kind of like spam. Before we talk about whaling, let's just talk about spam real quick. So spam is when you receive unsolicited email with undesired or malicious content in it. So a next step to spam is phishing, right? So phishing would be somebody actually trying to make that message look legit, right? They play with the email address that got sent to you. They play with the header to make it look like it was somebody from your organization, maybe, or somebody that you may know. And they're trying to typically either click on a link or provide them with some information or wire them some money or something. And then the next step of that will be spear phishing, which is basically going after what you call it, like a specific target in an organization. It's no longer uh, organizational spam trying to fish people. Now they, like, for example, they're going for HR, right? They're trying to get this from HR, a specific thing from HR. And after that, you have the next level, which is whaling. Whaling is when they're trying to actually fish an executive, right? So somebody really high up in the company. Now, phishing is the same thing as phishing, but via voice through the phone. Like, sometimes you get a call from somebody saying, hey, listen, you got approved for this credit card. I'm looking at your bank account here. Can you just give me your credit card number so that I can, you know what I mean? The guy's trying to get your credit card number right there. So that's what phishing will be. Malware, there are three infection vehicles. You have the virus, which is basically an executable that you click and it starts self-replicating. Uh, in that is like all sorts of scripts inside, and it does all kinds of things, right? Now, this in essence, though, it's executed by a user, right? It doesn't execute on its own. Somebody has to actually execute it. Now, worm, it's a different kind of vehicle because it doesn't require human interaction. It just replicates on its own. Trojan horse, it may be something that looks nice, or maybe like somebody sent you a picture, you open, and then there is some code being generated behind that picture, for example. So that's what a Trojan horse is. It's something that they make it that maybe benign. I mean, you think it is, but it's not. Or maybe the program doesn't do anything. You double click on it and nothing happens, right? So that's what a Trojan horse would be. Now, what this malware can do, you have several different things that they can be. They can be a backdoor, which basically gives a hidden access into your system. without the need to authentication. And typically, this access is going to be with admin credentials to somebody else, somebody, some hacker out there is going to be able to go in your box with admin access and do whatever they want. And you're not going to know about it unless you really start looking at your traffic. Rootkit, this basically is a type of malware that bends itself into the core of the operating system or the boot systems of the operating system. And they're very hard to find. And typically they have several copies of themselves in these higher up systems in the operating systems. And typically what is recommended to do when you have a rootkit is to do a clean install. Ransomware, it's something that's relatively, I'm not going to say it's a new type of virus because it's been out for a little bit now, but it's one of the latest things that, has come out. And basically what it does is it goes into your system, it makes a copy of everything you have, and then it deletes all the files and all your backups, right? Your shadow copies, as they say. And then the files they make copies from, it puts them but encrypted on all your directories. And they give you like a couple keys that you can kind of, see if they work. And they try to extort money from you to give you a master key that can unlock everything else. Spyware basically is designed to monitor the computer activities, like they see what you're typing, like a keylogger, So everything you type on your keyboard is sent to command control somewhere. Adware, well, as it says, is there to do propaganda and marketing for whatever product it is. A common use of adware is when they're trying to say, hey, your computer has been compromised, you have a virus. Click here and buy this antivirus, and we will clean your system. So I've seen tons of those types of adwares. It really doesn't do it. Like a computer is not compromised, it's just some JavaScript that they made it look pretty, like he's analyzing your system, but it's not doing anything because you didn't install anything. It's just, adware. Force access attacks. So these automated tools are commonly used for speeding in the cracking process. This has to do with cracking passwords, really. So you have four different types of password cracking processes here. You have the brute force, which basically you try every single combination to possible to decipher the password. You have the dictionary attack, which is literal dictionary of words in common passwords. Like they have a list of common passwords and they try to pair it up. It's a step above brute force, but still, could be time consuming. You have the hash table, which it tries to match your password to a hash value. And you have the rainbow table, which is basically uh, a copy of some hashes that could be your password. So if the user has this specific hash in the rainbow table, then their password is this, right? That's what a rainbow table will be. So they're a little bit similar if you look over here, but uh, rainbow table is definitely the most effective one. Network attacks, you have the denial of service attack, which is basically when you stop legitimate users from accessing a resource on a network. You have DDoS, which is a distributed denial of service attack. This is when several hosts around the world, we call them zombies, they are controlled typically by a command control somewhere, and they will attack whenever the hacker that compromises all these boxes tells them to, and they start executing code on behalf of the command control that they have uh, towards a resource. And essentially it's a denial of service, but it's a lower a lot more intensive because it's several computers trying to flood the same node with traffic. Eavesdropping is basically when you have somebody listening passively to the traffic that's going on the network, right? Maybe they were able to gain access to a building and they put a something like Wireshark and just listening to the traffic, right? That's what eavesdropping is. A man in the middle is when it's kind of like eavesdropping, but the exception there is that man in the middle will receive the traffic from somebody. So let's say you have two nodes, right? And then this guy talks to this guy, and then somebody comes in the middle, and when this guy sends traffic to this guy, it's gonna go through him first. He could get it, the traffic, and then impersonate back to this user here, pretending to be this guy. So now they start having this conversation here, right? And if he really wants to access this guy, maybe that was the target, he's going to be sending to this guy that everything is fine and requesting some other information, but he's really going to be forwarding traffic what he wants from this other host. So that's basically what a man in the middle is. It's like impersonation of another host. Um, Spoofing is a technique of which is often used on man in the middle, which you can spoof your IP address to pretend that you're another host, or your MAC address to pretend that you're another host, and that's basically what is used for. You can use that for man in the middle attacks. DNS hijacking is when an attacker gives false replies to a DNS request sent by a host in order to redirect traffic to a malicious or fraudulent site, sometimes called farming. So you're trying to go to chase.com and you're doing a DNS hijacking, you're sending to the host a different type of like a different IP. Okay, oh, you want to go to chase.com? Go to this IP here in Hong Kong or whatever, or some other country, and that's basically what you're doing, right? And you're not taking them to chase.com in the US. You're taking them to some farming site that looks like Chase in some other country. Network attacks. I guess I have a repeat on the slideshow, so let's go skip this one. About security controls, some important categories of security controls. Um, you have physical security controls, which are intended to protect against physical theft, intrusion, and vandalism. You have logical access control systems, which are intended to prevent unauthorized access to computers and data in person or over the network. You have data protection controls to both computers and networks. You have security hardware and software, which is intended to protect against malware and network attacks such as firewalls, antivirus software. You have controls intended to prevent harm to equipment or business or associated business disruptions. You like a maybe you have a backup to restore things, or yeah, some other tool there that like a load balancer to make sure that the load is proper, so you don't miss out on availability. Safety controls, which are meant to protect against threats to human well-being. You have policies and procedures used to reduce risk due to user errors or insecure practices. Principle of least privilege is also another type of security control. Basically, what least privilege is the idea that a user should only be doing or restricted down to the minimum needed for them to perform their work tasks. They shouldn't have any more permissions than what they are required. A lot of the times what will happen is that if you don't know what the user really needed to work, you give them some permissions of things that you know they're going to do, and then you let everything in there and you wait for the person to start requesting, hey, listen, if I'm going to be in charge of doing this, I also am going to need this permission because I've been trying to do it and it's denying me. So that's a way of if you need to have a baseline of that role because this work least privilege works very closely with role-based access controls. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're trying to set up a role-based access control in an organization. Least privilege has the goal to, rather than being a strict checklist, uh, in some systems enforce it more rigorous than others. Compliance. So there are several policies and best practices that follow specific regulations for compliance. Like, for example, you have SOX, or Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which prevents fraudulent accounting practices. You have HIPAA, which is the Healthcare Insurance Portability Accountability Act, which has to do with privacy of patient records. You have the GDPR, which is General Data Public Protection Regulation, which is a European Union regulation for privacy of individuals, which is a lot more stricter than the US is. As for example, did you know that if you go and you open an account on a bank, uh, your bank is not required to let you know that they could sell your data to some business? In the US, that is not a requirement. Now, you cannot do that in a European country. In a European country, if you want your data to be shared, you need to explicitly authorize that. While in the US, you need to explicitly tell the bank that you do not want your data to be sold to other organizations. So that's where the GDPR differs from the United States Privacy Act, and this has a little bit to do with the Patriot Act of, what is it, 2001. PCI DSS, or payment card industry data standard, basically is a standard for credit card transactions. If you go to any business that accept credit cards, you bet your money on it that they need to be PCI compliant. Uh, they are governed by the PCI Council. It's not really a requirement to be PCI compliant to, do transactions with credit cards. However, like I said, it's not a law. However, there is no major credit card company that will allow you uh, to use the credit card systems if you're not PCI compliant. That's the bottom line. Um, Types of regulated information. You have PII, or personally identifiable information, which is basically anything that could uniquely identify an individual, like a social security, it's PII. PHI is protected health information. Is PII, which is connected to the individual health status, so it has to do with HIPAA and stuff. The GDPR itself is a broad set of privacy laws intended to make sure that businesses, which make sure that the customers are aware that the PII business collects data about them and give them more control over what is collected and how long it's kept for. PCI DSS, PCI data regulations apply to any information regarding to a payment card. So if the company does credit card transactions, do they store their data? Is the credit card number going to be encrypted in the system? That type of stuff, that's what they're looking for. If there is no credit card transactions going on in the company, that is nothing really that is in the PCI scope here. Encryption. There is three types here of encryption. One of them is symmetric. Symmetric means that the same key that opens the door is the same key that closes the door. Asymmetric encryption is when you have two keys. You have a private key and a public key. One key locks, and one key, you have a key pair that opens and closes the door, basically. That's what it is. You have hashing, which is converts data into unique signature called hash. Hashes don't contain the original data and can't be reliably reversed. Very seldom somebody is able to crack a hash. Very seldom. Um, let's go to the next one here. Oh, just one thing here on the symmetric key. So it has a public and private key, right? So the public key typically a company will leave out, and it's very used. It's used on SSL, for example, right? And you're trying to access a bank, right? And the bank will always provide you the public key. So you use the public key to access the bank. The bank once receives your public key, it uses their private key that they store in the system, right? To unlock and I mean to see to verify that the public key is in fact their public key, right? So that's basically how it kind of operates. Access control. You have three things when it comes to access control. You have authentication, which is the positive identification of the user, which could be username and password, for example, is a method of authenticating. Authorizations is what that end user is allowed to do in a system. Can they write to the system? Can they read to the system? What are they authorized to do? Accounting is basically logging everything that the user is doing from the time they log in to every action that they take in the system to the time they log off. When did they log off? Why did they log off? Was that a connection dropped? Were they prompt for administrative access and they started putting wrong passwords, admin passwords, and they got locked out in the system, right? So this will be something that will be accounted for. 5 factors of authentication is something you know. For example, password is something you know, something you have, which could be a token or a one-time password key. Um, Something you are, which is has to do with biometrics, right? So thumbprint, your voice, that type of stuff. Your iris. Something you do is the way you do something. Like for example, a signature, right? The way you write, or your gait, how you walk, right? And then you have somewhere you are, which has to do with geolocation. Maybe authorization requires you to be in Miami, Florida to go inside this building. You can and to do this process. You cannot do the same process for the same organization from Atlanta, right? So that's where somewhere you are is important when it comes to authentication. Here's a few type of different factors of authentication. You have the single factor, which is just the password, or one way of authenticating. Two factors when you combine two things, like for example, a password and a one-time password, which is a token, right? So that's two-factor authentication. You have multi authentication. You have, like for example, a password. You have one-time password and your biometrics or something else even, right? Now there are different. If you look over here on the notes, and you guys can read this on your own. There are some more details on other types of authentication here that you guys can read on your own, like a hardware token, which is an actual physical device that is kept on a person, actual badge or card strip. That's another type of code. A smart card, which is something that you kind of pass it. You operate on an NFC type of uh, communication. So these are different types of authentications as well. Authentication services typically provided by uh, LDAP, which is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which is a standardized directory access protocol. If you go on Linux environment, it's going to be LDAP, but if you go on Windows, you're going to see that that's used on uh, Active Directory. Kerberos is actually an authentication protocol that is used by LDAP to provide authentication for accessing the Active Directory, right? So while Active Directory will be the access protocol, the Kerberos will be the authentication of that. Single sign-on is basically a relationship between a client and a network wherein the client is allowed to log on one time and it has access to all the resources based on that logon. Now, one thing that is tied to single sign-on is trust in by these different systems because a single sign-on is not going to be using just your organizational resources. Typically, going to have some type of federation between your Active Directory system and I don't know some like for example we have in BC, you have the Active Directory for the organization, which is operating of Office 365, and that single sign-on from one login allows you to connect to D12, which is using something else, right? But you have a trust to D12, right? To be able to desire to learn, to be able to use all that. So that's basically what single sign-on is. You log in one time and you access all the resources, but there has to be a trust between all these different resources by all these different organizations. Let's go to the next slide. Implementing strong authentication. First thing you need to think about is the username. Make sure that the username is not based on a real name or a role because this reduces security. Like for example, you're a database administrator and your login is DB admin. It's kind of obvious, right? So make sure that you pick something that's not going to be easily picked by users. But as far as real scenarios here, though, I know the book mentions real name, but a lot of the times you're going to be assigned a standard user account with your first letter of your first name and your last name. It's a very common practice. And this is because of organization emails to keep account easy and stuff like that. But I'm going to advocate that it is fine if it is a standard user account. However, if it is an administrative account, you do not want to do those as practices. You want to make sure that it's an account that people can just guess that that's what that account is doing. Uh, remove, rename, or disable default accounts. So every device comes with a default account. A lot of the times that default will be admin, and you don't want to keep that. Rename that or disable altogether once you have set up the device, but definitely make sure you take care of the default accounts. And goes without saying that sometimes systems may have guest accounts. You want to make sure that those are disabled as well. Password should be hard to guess, but easy for the user to remember. Make sure that you're implementing password complexity, which basically is a mix of upper, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. Consider two-factor authentication at the very least if if your system supports it. User accounts should be per individual. You should not be sharing these accounts unless, like for example, your organization, like Target, right? Target may have a kiosk in their mall, I mean, in their store for people to apply for a position. So yes, you may have a shared account there, but then again, it's a system that if it gets compromised, honestly, what is it doing? It's a form that people fill out and it sends an application via email somewhere. So it doesn't really compromise anything, right? So that will be fine. However, you want to make sure that you're not doing shared accounts for anybody. And if that does happen for any reason, make sure that the password is changed immediately after. Access control list. An access control list is basically attached to a resource. It gives permissions or rules about exactly what a person can do. In network especially, it could be used on routers to give you access to the router, or it could be on a firewall giving access to traffic to be allowed to a certain application and do something, right? So you authorizing this host to access this server to use these specific applications. So that would be kind of like an access control. Routers and firewalls can commonly filter according to several criteria. So it could be by IP, could be by MAC address, could be by port number, could be by protocols used. Oops, let's go back here. Kind of went a little bit of myself. Yeah, that's basically it on that one. Windows standard user roles. I don't think the book mentioned that these are Windows standard user roles because they are. I think you only mentioned these, but these are also Windows standard user roles. So there are several users that come whenever you set up either a new host. Some of these are going to be init, not all of them. Like for example, domain admin, you need to set up a domain controller to have a domain admin as a standard user. So basically, administrators, it's a local type of access, or it could also be a domain admin account. It gives you all the rights in the system, really. You can do whatever. Domain admin, only found in domain accounts, also has full control throughout the whole domain. So it's not to an individual host, but this will go on a domain level. So all the hosts within the domain. Users are basically members of a user group. Uh, there are no permissions here, just basic settings that they can change, stuff like that. It's nothing too major. Power users, in an older version of Windows, members of this group had privileges beyond the ordinary user, but less than an administrator. In modern Windows, this group exists, but it has no special privileges, so it's a lot like the regular users group. Guests are members of a group with much less limited permissions than users. They can't customize the systems, they can't install software, they cannot do much. Even the I guess even the password they cannot change. However, it is a best practice not to have those enabled. Uh, Backup operators, members in this group can do backup, restore files from anywhere, and then you have the remote desktop users, which are users that can actually remote into that specific machine. And they may be able to remote, but that doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want. So if they are users, the member of users, and members of remote desktop users, they cannot do any administrative function. They can only do what the users can do. Some other groups that are included on Windows are cryptographic operators, which are members of the group authorized to perform cryptographic operations. You have the distributed COM users, which are allowed to start, activate, and use DCOM objects on the computer. You have the IUSRS users, which is a built-in group used for the Internet Information Services. So if you use a Windows web server, which is IIS, this user is going to be enabled, but this is a system account, it's not a user account. You have network configuration operators, which are members of the group that can make changes to the TCP/IP changes, release and renew of the TCP addresses. You have the performance log users, which group of users that manage that can actually access the performance counters, the logs, the alerts, and stuff like that. You have the performance monitor users, which can to monitor performance counters on the computer locally on remote clients. You have the replicator, which is a group of replication functions. The only member of the replicator group should be domain user accounts that is used on the replicator services of the domain controller. So this is another service account. You have other remote assistant helpers. Members of this group are remote assistant users. So basically people that can offer remote assistance to other users on a network. Administrator responsibilities. Uh, Keep in mind that always use when you administrator Always use your standard user account or the day-to-day things. Only use your separate admin account if you really need to do administrative tasks. So let's say that you don't allow anybody to install software in your organization. So every time you need to install software on somebody else's computer, you're going to be prompted for a password. That's when you would use your administrative account to authorize yourself to install that software. But you should not be logging in as your admin user to do some change, some installation either, right? Unless you really restrict the account like that. But typically, going as a standard user, get prompt, use administrative password, do your admin tasks, and get out of there. Uh, do not disable user account access control, which is there to help you. It provides an extra protection from human error changes or limits programs from running with administrative privilege. So you definitely want to have the UAC on. That is a way to disable it. Some people, whenever they came out with it, back on Windows Vista, a lot of people wanted to disable it, but right now people know that it's needed. You need to launch most applications with admin privileges if you need to do any admin function on a box. So make sure that you follow that practice. Don't automate. So okay, my command prompt is all as administrator. So don't do that type of stuff. Trusted and untrusted software. So when you go online to download software, typically that is a way that you can verify if the software is legit, and that's through a hash. So if you see here, I actually have some screens here. If you go to the Fedora website and you can download the Fedora 33, which is the latest, you will get an ISO. And now you can take a hash of the ISO file, right? And you can either do this on Linux if you have them, but you can also you can get the checksum from them. You see they have it over here as a file. It's basically a hash. It's GPG, right? So you can follow that protocol and verify that the hash from the file, right, this ISO file here, matches the checksum that they have for the series. So this is Fedora x86-64. So you're looking for exactly this one here, Fedora 33 x86-64. So it needs to match whatever checksum or hash, the hash that they have here. So that's how you know that the site's legit. It's coming from the manufacturer. It's not intercepted or downloaded from a bad resource, right? So that's basically what it is. Let's go to the next one. Physical security, basically access controls devices to keep people from going in places or doing things that they're not supposed to. They include walls, fences, security doors, lock cabinets, and so on. Surveillance system are designed to detect intruders, whether they are successful in bypassing other security. Examples include camera, motion alarms, security guards. You have visible deterrents, which are actually meant to discourage people. It could be a guard dog. It could even be a visible camera. Visible. Sometimes people go into places to see a camera and they're like, "Oh, I'm not gonna do what I was gonna do," you know. Or they hear a dog bark and they're like, "Oh, I don't like dogs," you know. So that's what a deterrent is. So this is another list of several different types of security control. You have also hardware locks and security, we talked about that. You have man traps, which is those rotating doors that you see sometimes in buildings. This is to keep tailgating from happening. So one person passes the badge, they go through a door that only fits one person. So when a person comes behind, they're not going to be able to get in the building, right, if they don't have a badge. Video surveillance, you have camera versus guard, you know. Uh, Ideally, if you can afford to have both. Fencing, sometimes, fences around the building could be a deterrent. People don't go through the fence, especially if it is electroshocking fence. Access lists, well, basically, if you have, it could be by badge, could be by security guard checking on, oh, can this guy come in the building? Proper lighting, right? So a lit place, it's typically more secure than a dark place. People, bad elements tend to, it's more approachable to do get into a building, force breaking into a building if it is dark than if it is properly lit. Have signs like you're being filmed type of stuff, so people, oh, and maybe even if they don't see the cameras, they see that sign and they're like, oh, they have cameras here, maybe we shouldn't rob this place. Guards, barricades, which goes, a little bit beyond fencing. You have biometrics, which is authorizing the person based on their biometrics. Protected distribution, alarms, motion detection. So you see that is a three-layer model here. You have the perimeter security, right, which is you got a fence, you got a video camera, and then you have the building. We have some more security like a lock door. You have a lock combination to go into the computer room. So as you can see, there is several layers that you'll be looking into making the building more secure. User education. User education is very important because it helps keep people from doing poor security practices. So you want to make sure that employees are exposed to security related best practices and legal requirements for the job role, uh, such as common social engineering attacks, so they understand how they're supposed to act if something like that happens, how to look for the suspicious behavior, for example, so they actually know, oh my God, this guy is really phishing me. That they need to alert newly discovered or training attacks uh, that might affect them, such as specific malwares or phishing techniques. So you want to make sure that your users aware of things as they're happening. Like, for example, you notice your organization is getting the spam about this prince from Nigeria trying to, get their bank account numbers. Hey, listen, we see this email going around, so that means that that threat is trending in your organization. So you want to send an email out just to let people know. Because in case somebody haven't seen that yet on the email box, when they see it, they will know, oh, okay, IT, let me know about this. Tailor duties and education efforts to user role and technical knowledge. So don't be expecting somebody that works in sales to understand your jargon, right? So you want to make sure that you are going on their level and explaining so that they understand what they need to be looking for. Supply network security personnel with complete documentation about security policies, provide technicians with detailed security requirements for systems that they install and maintain, advise management about overall goals and requirements for organizational security, work with human resources staff to educate other employees and contractors and respond to non-compliance issues, and to onboard and offboarding new and departing users. Enforce separation of duties to prevent fraud or error by employees. Educate users about password policies and how they use other authentication systems securely. Establish clear policies for handling of organization equipment or data off premise, and user devices or visitors on premise as well. And this concludes this slideshow, and I'll see you on the next.